I know it's a lot easier for people to buy curriculum, set up a space, and have the kid, do that day's work. That definitely is how homeschooling works for lots of families, and it works very well, and everyone's very happy. And if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Like I do believe in that. I also think there's so many opportunities for just the highest level of learning.
Afsaneh, thank you so much for being here on the podcast. Can you please share who you are, what you do, and how you help people?
Sure. My name is Afsaneh Moradian. I am a children's author. I am the founder of MLC Homeschool Coaching, and I'm a homeschooling coach who focuses on helping parents who are really struggling with homeschooling their kids. And I'm also the host of the Neurodiverse Homeschooling Summit.
I think a lot of people are just realizing that it might be better to homeschool your kids. There are more and more people who are running businesses and homeschool their kids. I've definitely noticed it, since the pandemic, especially because I did a whole summit about it because I was trying to decide if I was going to homeschool or not. And speaking to other people who had businesses who were homeschooling their kids, I was able to see the possibilities like, oh yeah, I can do this. I would love for you to talk more about how is it possible to run a business and homeschool your kids. We're both business owners. We both homeschool our kids. And I would love for people who are thinking about homeschooling, or maybe they already are, but they're still kind of in limbo. Things are kind of chaotic. They don't see like, how am I going to make this work? Because there is definitely a shift that happens when you homeschool your kids.
Yeah, I think especially for business owners, we don't conform and we don't settle. So we don't look at what there is and say, oh, then that must be what our life is going to be. That's not it at all. We're creative thinkers who forge our own paths. And I think homeschooling then is a very natural progression for how we want to raise our kids, because the schooling system, there are some amazing schools, but not everyone has access to them, either because they're magnet schools or they're private schools that are $60,000 a year, or it's not always an option. And I think in order to be a business owner, you also have to be pretty stubborn. Like, I don't have a plan B. I'm a homeschooling coach, and that's what I do. And I don't have a plan B for homeschooling. It's, had to make it work or suffer because that's what we were doing. So I think it makes perfect sense that business owners would choose homeschooling. I think what's really important to keep in mind is, just as you have to have a creative approach to figure out how to make your business work and how to make your business work within your life and create the life that you want to have as a business owner, that has to extend to homeschooling. So it isn't to homeschool to then recreate school at home. It's actually to give your child a different kind of experience than what they would have if they went to school. Because you can't recreate it. We don't have Bunsen burners. We don't have all the equipment in the labs and things like that. We're doing something different in a different way. And that has to then lead you to what is best practice for your family. And that's not best practice for every family. That's what works for your family. So it's really important to see that your kids, at different stages of development, at different ages, have different needs. If they're really young, doing a half hour of learning games is great, is kind of what they can handle. I mean, if all the games are learning games and you do some, take a break, do some more, but really, 30 minutes. And then the earlier grades, you're talking about an hour a day, an hour and a half. Even high school level, 2 hours of focused work is a lot to do and a lot to ask of a teenager. And if you think about the school experience, so much of our day was filled with transitions and with things that gave our teacher prep periods. So music and gym and lining up and going to lunch and going to recess, and the actual instruction time and the amount of time that we spent actually doing stuff wasn't that much, right? In a 45, 50-minute period, you come in, get settled, there's like 30 minutes of the actual class that would take place with all the transitions and interruptions and announcements and goofing off and all sorts of things. And of that time, I was probably doodling in my notebook for a lot of it. I don't, so much of my school memories is how I, how I procrastinated and passed the time, not the actual stuff we learned. So there's zero pressure on homeschooling parents to do a 6 hour day. That would be bananas. And there's zero pressure to do school at home. So even I work with my clients to show them you don't have to even separate out the different subjects. There's so much intersectionality between the subjects because art is science and math sometimes, and baking in the kitchen is chemistry and math and can be art if you are decorating the stuff. So there's all kinds of ways that you can overlap the subjects so you're not stuck. Because I think that's what becomes really overwhelming is, oh my gosh, how am I going to buy curriculum or curriculum for each subject, or find one that's going to be great, that's going to meet my kids' needs, that they're going to want to do and have fun doing. Like kind of doesn't really exist for the most part. And then how am I going to plan out 5 days of math and 5 days of reading and 5 days of writing? And then what do I do when my kid says, no, I don't have time because I have a Zoom call, I have a work meeting, I have things I have to do. So we are hyper scheduled. Usually, if I don't schedule in free time, I don't get free time. So it really is looking at what are your needs and then what are the learning needs and developmental needs of your kid. And the way that I always say, the way to approach it is everybody wins. Homeschooling can't be at your expense, and it can't be something miserable that our kids are doing begrudgingly because that's math is that worksheet and you better do it or else you won't learn math. So it's really opening up our vision of what learning at home is, that it's fun, it's creative, it's dynamic, it can be interdisciplinary. There's no rules, there's no limits on the thing. It should ideally be topics that you're interested in or feel passionate about, because if you're not interested, it's gonna be really hard for your child to be interested. And ideally it brings in your child's passions. And of course, kidpreneurship is an amazing experience that brings in so many different subjects, oh my gosh, and so many skills that they can develop that don't even fit into the 5 main subjects, right? So they're developing a business sense early and not having to go through all the pain that I have to go through as an adult with my coaching business. So I think that it's absolutely possible. And I think it really is going into it knowing that you can make it work for you and your family. So if it isn't, then it's problem solving. It's looking at why isn't it working and making changes so that it does work, because absolutely, it's an amazing, amazing option, largely because of the flexibility that it provides and the openness and creativity.
You brought up a lot of great points. First one is that you're not recreating the experience that your child has at a traditional school environment. This was a big one to break, especially if there's people around you that just don't get the homeschooling thing at all. Another great point is that every child learns differently. And I think one of the many benefits of being able to homeschool your child, first of all, you don't have to do it by yourself. You can actually invest in help to help the homeschooling experience, like the work that you do, Afsaneh. I think it's great that we are free thinkers as business owners. We are creative. We go against what's considered normal in this society.
I think all that's very true. I also think that homeschooling that enables kids to have agency.
Yeah.
And have greater responsibility for their own learning, because they're not doing it because everyone else is doing it and the teacher told them to do it. They're doing it because it comes from them, and the way they're doing it they get to put themselves in it too. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of really important things going on that get lost in a traditional sort of one size fits all learning environment. And I think it's bringing, like I say, best practice, bringing the best stuff into your homeschooling experience. So I know it's a lot easier for people to buy curriculum, set up a space, and have the kid, do that day's work. That definitely is how homeschooling works for lots of families, and it works very well, and everyone's very happy. And if it isn't broken, don't fix it. I do believe in that. I also think there's so many opportunities for just the highest level of learning, the highest level of intellectual stimulation, of going out into the world, connecting learning to what's around, exploring, experiencing, and really, not putting any limits at all on what our kids get to learn. And in the process, we keep learning and we get to use our creativity, and we're a part of that process too, which I think makes it really exciting. I got to spend my morning writing haikus with my child, and I don't think I would have done that otherwise. That was a pretty awesome morning. So, really enjoying the ride, enjoying the journey, and setting things up so that, like I said, so that there isn't, resistance and power struggles getting in the way. That is the first sign that the type of learning experience isn't developmentally appropriate for your child.
I know that there's people watching or listening who are experiencing power struggles, and they don't know how to navigate this. It can be very challenging being a parent, and I know the way that you work with your clients is amazing. Which is why I wanted you on the podcast, because your method, it's the most unique thing I've ever seen in the homeschool space. The resources are limited out there. I mean, there's more coming up, which is why I wanted you on the podcast, because I trust your method. I know that you deliver results. Your clients have amazing experiences, not only working with you, but they're also seeing like what's possible. What is going on here? Like what is this magic that you have going on in you, to where you can help people like break that, especially when they come to you kind of in crisis.
Yeah, I'm the resistance whisperer, right? That's my forte. It starts with resistance, right? It starts with pushback, and I don't even think that is specific to kids with a diagnosis. I think that is, can call your child strong-willed. If you're raising an independent thinker, my condolences. It's a lot harder to parent a child who is going to question and think for themselves and feel respected enough to say no. So, I mean, I laugh because I have one of those, and I go to visit friends' houses and I see my friends say, oh, they tell their kids, go put your shoes on, we're going to leave. And the kids go put their shoes on and get ready to leave. And my jaw drops. I've never had that experience. I didn't know that was possible. I say, we're going to leave. Where are we going? Why are we going? What are we going to do? I'm not ready to go. I have to do this. There's a whole negotiation that has to take place before the shoes can go on. So it is a lot harder. And I think most of us are really trying to raise confident, independent thinking kids with high self-esteem who think that they have value and worth. And it's harder. It's harder. So when there is resistance, when there's pushback, I think it's very easy for parents to say, oh, they're asserting their independence, they're asserting their autonomy. Sure, that's a part of it. But when there's resistance, there's a boundary being set. And your child is saying, I can't do what you're asking me to do in the way you're asking me to do it in the moment that you're asking me to do it. So if you just take it as a show of independence, then you don't know what they actually need help with. You don't know what need isn't being met. And if you take the resistance as just an act of defiance and a challenge to your authority, again, you don't know what they need help with, because it's really saying, I can't do this thing in this way. And you don't know why, and they might not even know why, because it takes a lot of self-awareness. And for some people, it takes years and years and years of therapy to be able to say, I have this need and I need this need met in this way. And most of us don't have that vocabulary, and children really don't have that vocabulary. So they just feel the discomfort. They know that they can't, and that doesn't always make sense to the adult. What do you mean you can't? Of course you can. You did it yesterday. I know you know how to do this. Do this thing. We have to go. And it becomes a real test of patience. It becomes a real test of communication, because it's so hard for us in that moment to see things from our kids' point of view, to try to figure out what is happening in the child's world. They are the center of their own universe, and you're the center of your own universe. So you're having a completely different experience than your child, even though you're in the same room and you're in the same conversation. And we know that because we have misunderstandings with our partners, with other adults, and we're sitting at the same table having the same experience, and everyone remembers it differently. So we know that that's how we exist in the world. So it really becomes important to, rather than figuring out how to get your child to do the thing anyway, which is going to then make your child push back even harder because they're saying they can't do it and you want them to do it anyway. So then they feel like you haven't heard them, and that they need to make you even more aware that they really can't do this thing. And then you feel like you have to get them to do it even harder. So it ends up that you're both backed in a corner, and usually there's some kind of threat. Screens are a pretty powerful thing, do this or else you lose screen time, do this or else, right? If you do this, you get this positive thing. If you don't do it, there's this negative consequence. And for a child who's saying, I can't do it, it's just going to lead to, maybe they will begrudgingly try to do it or not really do it, but make it look like they're trying. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, you have a full-blown explosion and a child in crisis because they can't do this thing. They have this need that isn't being met. So as soon as there's resistance to assignments, if you're homeschooling, as soon as there's pushback and resistance to assignments, it's not laziness, it's not apathy, it's not, maybe your child is sick or hungry or thirsty or really needs to move around, maybe. But in general, if there's behavior issues with learning, it's a planning issue. That's really the rule. And it means that they need a different approach. This curriculum, these assignments, this type of approaching their learning is not right for them. And that's great because there's so many different ways to learn something. There's so many different ways to learn multiplication tables, so many different ways to learn how to write a paragraph or write an essay. There's a million different ways to approach it. So that's where the creativity comes in. Yeah, that is my job. This is where I come in to help parents figure it out faster so they don't have to go and spend a million hours doing searches, trying to come up with things to try, buying more. My clients have spent so much money on curricula, and I always say, stop buying it. Just stop. You can take what you have and modify it, or you might decide you don't even want to use it, and it's easier and faster to just do it your own way, and I'll show you how. There's just so many different approaches. But it's also really thinking about, what becomes really important issues. So it's funny how we think about learning from our experience. I had to stand up in third grade and recite the times tables, all 12 times table, and the teacher just stood there waiting for me to make a mistake to lower my grade for each mistake. And I hated it. It was the worst thing I had to do. I'll never forget it. And yeah, I know my times table, but I didn't need the trauma in order to learn my times table. And I'm not sure that I had to memorize all of it in order to function in math later on. And it's funny how many parents call me and they say, we get into it over math because I say, show your work, and my kid doesn't want to show their work. And it's pretty funny because in school, we have to show our work to prove that we didn't copy the answer from the kid sitting near us. Not because it's actually necessary. If your child can tell you how they got the answer, they don't have to show their work and say, well, because math is going to get more difficult later on. Yeah, but when it gets more challenging, then they'll write it down because there'll be a need to write it down. But, if they know to carry the one and they don't write the little one on top of the thing, it's not the end of the world. And it doesn't, they've learned, they know how to do it. And if you're going to insist on these things that they just feel like are arbitrary, tedious, they're not going to enjoy that. They're going to push back. So that's where, there is a real communication piece involved with parenting and with homeschooling. And then there really is, thinking through the planning in a way that you might be nervous and overwhelmed and just want to buy something and use it, but it's very difficult to find a pre-packaged curriculum that's going to fit your child 100%. And I know that I write curriculum, and I know it's very difficult, which is why I give lots and lots and lots of choices in the curriculum that I write, but I also expect the adult to make modifications for their classroom, for their group, for their individual child. So that's really where resistance comes in, and it's okay. You have to be open to the idea that you can trust your child, and if they're pushing back, they have a very good reason, and it's worth trying to find out why they're resisting rather than just trying to get them to do it anyway.
Thank you for bringing this up, because there are a lot of lessons in what you just shared about how we are being as parents or caregivers to our children when we're homeschooling them. Communication is important. Remembering that they're just little humans that prefer their own way of doing things. And I think it almost is easier. It is easier to put your kid in an environment where they got to do these things and they got to do as everybody else, but it's not really fulfilling for the child. I guess any of us could think back to our childhood and our school environments, and the things that we disliked about it. Now, just imagine the same thing happening in your household while you're homeschooling your kid. Like, that experiences could be happening to your child, and you don't even realize it because you don't have somebody outside on the outside looking in on what's happening, which I think is something very valuable to have, is to have someone like you to be able to see, like, what's the root of this, what is going on, and you being able to help them in a very unique way according to their situation. Because I don't think a cookie cutter approach is a solution for anybody in this situation. I know there's so much more that we could talk about, Afsaneh, and I definitely want you back on the podcast, but I think what you've shared so far is plenty for the people watching and listening. Where can they connect with you outside of the podcast?
My website is mlccoaching.com, and you can apply for a free consultation call, and we can have a chance to talk about what you're experiencing and how you would like it to be instead, and then come up with an action plan for how to get you there. I have a Facebook group, MLC Homeschooling Community. It's a private group that you're welcome to join. And yeah, and then, if you sign up for a consultation call and get on the mailing list, then you find out about free master classes and summits and all the great things that I host throughout the year for free.
Thank you so much for the resources. And for those of you watching or listening, all of Afsaneh's information is going to be on the show notes page. If you're watching this, look below in the description. If you're listening to this on your podcast app, look in the description. All of Afsaneh's information will be there. And I highly encourage you to reach out to her. She has an amazing mind, and she's also an amazing coach. Before we close out, I would love for you to share some final words of wisdom to the parent who hasn't started homeschooling yet, but you sparked their interest, because they just know deep inside, like, they don't want to put their kid in private school or public school, but they don't know if they can actually do this. They do have the time. They know they can make the time, but they don't know if they can actually do this. What do you want to tell them?
So you're absolutely the best person to teach your child, because nobody loves your child more than you do, and no one is more invested in their education and their future than you are. So you can absolutely do this. Do you have all of the tools that you'll need to be able to do it in a way that works for everyone? Maybe, maybe not. But if you go into it knowing that you're going to try, and then there will be some challenges that come up, but you're not alone in figuring them out. And every single challenge has a solution, and it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to sit in the struggles longer than you want to, because every problem has a solution. Everything comes down to communicating, planning, structures, and all of that can be adjusted and fixed for you to make it work, and for you to really have a wonderful homeschooling experience and for your kids to learn more. I think the goal is for them to learn more than they would at school, and that is absolutely possible. So you don't, you can trust yourself and your ability to figure things out, as you have been doing since you had a baby and had no idea what you were doing with a baby. And it's a constant, lifelong learning, adjusting, getting more tools in our toolbox, developing skills we never knew we would need or be able to have. And it's very similar to starting a business and having a business. So I think it's a very similar mindset, that there's going to be challenges you don't expect, and you'll have to figure them out. And if you can't figure it out on your own, then you get help and you get resources to do that.